I've been playing F123 for the last couple of days, and for me, the most important part of any new F1 game is the handling model, so I thought I'd do a deep dive into exactly what's changed for this year's game. Big shout out to EA for sending me the preview build, and I should say, obviously this is an early build, it's not a representation necessarily of the final game, and also if you want to see the raw gameplay, go over to my gameplay channel. All the footage you see in this video is going to be available on that channel in raw format. But before we get into nitty gritty, let's get my first impressions, my very first laps on the game. Okay, here we go, about to go on track for F123 for the very first time. I've not played this game at all before, not anywhere, not in private, not in a beta somewhere. This is my first go. Now I've got everything default for this first go, default setup, default camera angles, default everything. The only thing I've slightly tweaked is I've just turned the force back onto the same settings I want in F122 to hopefully get a better feel for it. Now we are running Silverstone here, which has been updated for F1 2023, or F123 I should say. And of course the handling is the main difference. So let's get a feel for things then. Tell me used to be easy flat. Yeah, okay, still easy flat. In fact, even easier flat, I'd say, than last year's game. Felt like breaking at the same point. Yeah, got to stop well enough. Okay, definitely more traction. Definitely more traction. The rumours were not false. Definitely. Oh, yeah. Full throttle there in third gear, just about. Kind of a bit bumpier, interestingly. A little bit bumpier, maybe. Maybe. Not too sure on that one. Yeah, I mean, Silverstone's obviously changed, so we'll ignore the track changes for now. We'll get into those a little bit later on, but for now, let's just get a feel for exactly how this car feels. Now, at the moment I'm feeling a bit more understeer than last year's game, but as I said, I am running a default setup, so it's not, you know, it's not going to feel quite as alive as last year's game did with all the sweaty setup. The reason I'm not running a setup is because obviously this is my first try. Oh my god, there's so much grip through there, that might be flat. But yeah, I don't want to run a setup that worked on last year's game, it might not work on this year's game, so I prefer to run a setup that they've actually provided. My name there hovering around the screen, very annoying. Okay, so what I'm feeling straight away, more downforce and more traction. Now in theory that means the lap time is going to be quicker, but the lap time shouldn't be quicker. So we will see, and the braking points don't seem really shorter, so I suspect that means we're maybe slower in the slow speed corners. Let's fill it through here. Okay, a little bit deep in there. Yeah, I felt like we're a touch slower maybe in the slow speed turns. Possibly, not 100%. Is Cops here going to be completely flat out? We're going to try it. 8th gear, absolutely flat. Oh yeah, easy. That's ridiculous. Oh god, understeered A. See, I mean, understeered wide. Again, we are on a default setup. It's important to note that, so I'm sure we'll be able to find some sort of rotation. Okay, just try to just effectively floor it there. We'll do it for similar here. Try to really be aggressive with the power. Wow. Full throttle there, about halfway through third gear. I feel like that might be too easy on traction, maybe. Let's slow down here and give it a little test. Okay, we do get wheel spin in, how about third? Floor it. No. No wheel spin at all in third. Other than that, it feels largely similar to last year's game. It's certainly an evolution, not a revolution. I mean, look, I'm able to drift. It's not like they've changed everything massively. You know, I'm able to drift, catch slides, that sort of thing. I like it. I'm definitely interested to see once we get some esports setups on the go. Okay, DRS Open now, yes. Whoa, wait, we'll slide with DRS Open. Oh, super hard to hold on to, but I'm about to say, but I'm managing it. I'm not anymore. R.I.P. R.I.P. So let's dive into some of the things that I picked up on in those first impressions then. The first thing is the traction. There definitely is more traction in F123. You can use lower gears, you can use more throttle. It's absolutely clear to see there is more traction. The exits are a lot easier than last year's game. But exactly why is that? Well, I've got some insider information to tell you exactly what's going on under the skin to give you that increased traction. The first of which is increased grip if you go over the limit of the tyre. So that was a massive difference in 22 compared to 21 before it, was that the second you go over the limit of the tyre, so maybe you get some wheel spin or whatever it may be, you just get a massive drop off of grip in 22. And that's what caused the wheel spin and the traction to be so difficult, because you only had to go over the limit by a small margin and suddenly you get a massive amount of wheel spin and you are spinning off and whatever else. For 23 though, that has been changed. So now if you go over the limit of the tyre, if you get a bit too much wheel spin, the grip drop off is less pronounced compared to what it was before. So it means that it's not quite as punishing if you get it a little bit wrong on the exits. Another thing that's contribution to the perceived increased traction in F123 is the throttle map. Now previously, the throttle map was completely one-to-one. It was completely linear in previous F1 games. So if you were putting in 30% throttle input, the game would be giving you 30% power. Same as 80% throttle input, 80% power. You get the idea. It's always one-to-one. This year's game, though, is much more dynamic, and that is just like real life. This effectively just makes it a little bit more drivable, a little bit more linear, a little bit more, I guess, easier, rather than having to think around the torque curve of the engine and think, well, I'm low revs now, so I can press the throttle really hard, or I'm high revs now, so I can't press the throttle so hard. Now it should be a lot more consistent across the whole torque range. Speaking of torque, the torque curve of the actual engine itself has also been changed. So where in previous games the torque curve was actually quite flat, so really early in the RPM range, it would get to peak torque and then just stay there. It would literally be a flat line with the top of the torque curve before, until obviously you get really high revs. Now though, with the new game, the torque is a lot more realistic. So the torque actually builds up with RPM. It basically means that short shifting is not going to be as powerful as it was before. So where previously, let's say you short shifted to 5th gear, because the torque was at maximum at, let's say, I'm guessing, but something like 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, as long as you're at 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, you would get a maximum torque. But on F123, that is no longer the case. So if you do that, if you short shift to 5th and you go full throttle, you're not going to be getting the same amount of torque. You'll actually get a little bit less torque than you did on previous games. Now, I do think short shifting will still be a thing, just like it is in real life, but I don't think it'll be quite as extreme as it was in F122, which is definitely for the best because the short shifting was a bit too extreme in 22. And the final factor then that affects the traction in F123 is the tyres themselves. Now, in previous F1 games, the tyres were effectively wooden blocks. You can imagine that the second you step over the limit, it's just going to instantly start spinning. Now imagine if that tyre is really, really squishy, the same amount of grip, the same rubber, but really, really squishy. If you step over the limit, you can now imagine that would sort of be a bit more reluctant just to spin up really fast and be happier to stay gripped rather than happier to spin. So squishy tyres is going to help you get a bit more traction in F123. While we're on the subject of the squishy tyres, that is also what helps you take a bit more curb in F123. Now, I didn't really notice this too much at Silverstone in my first impressions because there isn't really many curbs that are particularly raised. But as soon as I raced around Imola, I noticed I was able to take much more curb, particularly in the chicane in the middle of the lap and also in the chicane at the start of the lap, turn 1. Hopefully this doesn't mean that we're flying over the curbs all 4 wheels again. The car does still seem to bottom out a little bit, but it doesn't bottom out nearly as much as it does in real life. You know, that's why they don't take the curb, because ultimately it would end up damaging the car. But hopefully it doesn't mean we can abuse the curbs too much. We'll have to wait and see. The final thing then that I noted from my first impressions was the massive difference now between low speed and high speed grip. Now obviously you can always carry more speed through a higher speed corner because you've got more downforce, but in last year's game it actually felt quite similar in low speed as it is high speed. There wasn't that much difference really between the two, whereas something like iRacing has got a massive difference between the two. You can really feel the downforce build up. That never used to happen in the F1 games, but they have now changed that. Now my understanding is that it's basically that the tyres produce a little bit less grip at low speed and a little bit more grip at high speed, which effectively means that the tyre slides a little bit less, I think, at high speed, but it slides a little bit more at low speed. So it just means you get a bit more understeer, a bit less grip at low speed and a bit more grip at high speed. I actually really like this change. You know, F1 cars are high downforce monsters of cars. It should feel really planted and really nice in high speed, but then low speed, you know, they're really big, heavy cars these days. It shouldn't feel amazing at low speed, despite the really grippy softs and the special suspension that F1 cars have these days. So for me, that change is actually really positive. We'll have to wait and see how that affects setups. I suspect what we'll see is we'll see setups that, you know, add a lot of rotation and a lot of grip at low speed, but then it makes it really unbalanced at high speed. So I suspect you'll end up with quite a low front wing, but quite a high rear wing level in order to balance that out, and then super loads of rotation at slow speed. But we'll have to wait and see what the esports guys come up with for that. So moving on to some of the things then I didn't actually notice in my first impressions. The first of which is that the force feedback system has actually been improved. Now, more of the physics of the car gets fed directly into the wheel, where previously it maybe was a little bit more basic. Now there's just more elements to it. It's hard to know exactly what gets fed into the force feedback system, but it's just a bit more real. It's a bit more connected to the car now. You may also notice that in the menus, the understeer enhance option is now gone. They've got rid of that this year, and that's because it's not actually needed this year, because now there's a bit more physics feeding into the force feedback system itself. You don't need understeer enhance. You can just feel it better naturally. And the fact that I used to run understeer enhance option on last year's game, and it's obviously off this year's game, it doesn't exist on this year's game, and I didn't even notice that it disappeared at first, that just shows you clearly the force feedback system has improved. The second thing that's been added that I missed is now brake migration is a thing. Now, this is a thing that is there in real life, and it basically is the less brake you use, the more rearward the brake bias. Now, the reason being, if you're in a straight line and you want to get the car to stop as quickly as possible, you slam on the brakes to full utilization. You want the brakes sort of to the front a little bit because the weight does go to the front, even in a super flat and low F1 car. But then as you start to get to the apex and you're trying to trail brake in, you don't want braking force at the front because then you're just going to lock the front tires because it's them that are actually doing the turning. So again, just like in real life, what happens is as you start to ease off the brakes at the end of a braking zone, the brake bias actually transitions rearwards to help you stop locking the fronts. Again, this is exactly the same as real life. I didn't actually notice it when I was playing because I've been using default setups, which has got quite a forward brake bias, but I think it'd be a lot more noticeable when you're right on the limit of grip, and it's cool. Unfortunately, it's not customizable in the game. I'd love to be able to move around the brake migration or make it more extreme or less extreme, but unfortunately, this game, it's not customizable, but it's cool that it's in the game nonetheless. Another thing that's changed with the handling of F1 23 is, of course, the setup. Now, the most obvious thing that's changed is, of course, the suspension menu in the setup options. Clearly, there's a lot more options there now compared to last year's game, and that just gives you a lot more, I guess, scope, a lot more leeway, just to be a lot more fine with the changes you're making, which is a good change. The setup concept is going to change with this year's game as well. I won't go into too much detail because, I'll leave it to the esports guys to come up with good setups, and the guys at the top of the leaderboards, they'll figure out the best setups. I'm not in a good place to do that. But it looks like on this year's game, it's going to be best to keep the car within a really narrow window, just like real life. Where previously, there wasn't that much punishment for running your car high or low. In this year's game, there is. So you want to keep the car as low as possible, but also keep it as stable as possible. So you're probably going to be running quite a stiff suspension this year, because otherwise, if you don't run a stiff suspension that's really soft and it starts to roll, you're just going to start to lose downforce. So you want a really stable platform, just like the Red Bull car has managed to get in real life. Another thing that's changed is the introduction of the precision drive system. Now, this is a system only for pad players. I'm not a pad player, so I'm not really going to comment too much on this because I just won't be able to feel the difference. But basically what it is there's a lot more of the wheel force feedback and the wheel settings now available on pad. So where previously pad was sort of quite separate from wheel, now the feeling of both should be very similar, and it should allow you to drive a lot more like you would on a wheel, but on a pad. Now, there's obviously still some restrictions, like, for example, you won't be able to turn the wheel full 360 while you're doing top speed. That's just not going to be possible because, on pad, you would never be able to get that exactly right where you can with a wheel. So there'll still be some restrictions with it, but it sounds now like pad is going to be much more close to wheel. So it'd be interesting to hear from some of you guys that are regular pad users from the previous F1 games if it has improved massively year on year. And that is about it. Pretty much everything else feels pretty similar to last year. I mean, I will say it's an evolution of last year, not a revolution, which I think is good. I quite like the handling last year. I actually quite like the lack of traction, but I know a lot of people didn't. So there'll be a lot of people that are grateful that there's more traction now. But honestly, it didn't need a complete rework, and I think that's a good thing. They're just now improving it year on year, just evolving it bit by bit, making it a little bit better every single year. And I definitely feel like it just feels like a more all-rounded handling model this year. They've obviously, sort of fix the traction issues a little bit. The car's a little bit less severe over the bumps, although I do wish it bottomed out a little bit more, so you can't just abuse the curbs too badly. Overall, definitely an improvement from last year. I don't feel like there'll be anyone that says it's worse. The only exception might be that you can maybe take more curb now. That's the only thing that I can foresee people possibly complaining about. But other than that, I honestly can't see anyone being unhappy with this year's handling model. Well, there we go then, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos just like this one coming very soon. Lots more deep dives, really detail-orientated videos. And don't forget to subscribe as well to the Alex Gilling gameplay channel. Link to that is down in the description. There'll be lots more raw gameplay coming out on that channel too, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.